Hello, listeners. This is Kat, and welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfics. This will be the reading of the one-shot entitled, Even Heroes Need a Catnap. Here's the summary. Aizawa likes cats. Does that mean he wants to be one? No. Well, too bad, and now it's everyone else's problem. Eraserhead was having a good day, which doesn't happen very often. His Hell class hadn't destroyed anything, and nobody had broken any bones. Even Midoriya managed to get through the day unharmed. He hadn't had much work to grade, and he'd slept 6 hours the night before. He was suspicious, to say the least. Something had to go wrong soon. It always did, and not knowing what would happen was driving him a little crazy. The man was sitting on the roof of an apartment building as he decided what direction to go in. He was grateful for being an underground hero and not having to stick to a specific patrol. Predictability was never good. It was a still night, no wind, and only the normal city noises in the background, as Eraserhead jumped down onto the next building and headed further into the city. He was passing a park when the sound of yelling met his ears. The man quickly ran toward the commotion to see 3 people. They were standing at the edge of a wooded area, so the hero perched on a tree branch to watch. He wanted to jump in right away, but knew better. Running into a fight with no knowledge of the situation was dangerous. There were 2 men, one with short blonde hair, and the other with a quirk that made his skin glisten like an oil spill. The other person was a young lady with plain brown hair and pixie-like ears who was trying her best to walk away from the other 2. Not that it was working very well. The blonde guy grabbed her by the arm, and that's when Eraserhead moved. He jumped down from the tree, capture scarf shooting out, immobilizing the blonde man and pulling him away from the woman. The other guy recovered from the shock quickly, however, and ran at Eraserhead, some sort of liquid shooting from his palms that the hero only just managed to dodge. It splattered on the ground, and the grass instantly turned brown and died. It must be some sort of pollution quirk, then. The hero sidestepped as the man tried to run at him, and used their momentum to slam the thug into the ground. Eraserhead restrained the pollution man before moving to the blonde, who was still fighting against the capture scarf. He bent down to undo the scarf with one hand, the other holding cuffs. In the second between the scarf loosening and the cuffs being closed around his wrist, the criminal slapped Eraserhead across the face. It was hardly the worst injury he'd gotten, and he quickly finished restraining the man. The hero tapped into the comms for someone to come get the criminals. He was exhausted and really didn't want to deal with both of them. "It's Eraserhead. I need someone to pick up 2 criminals in the park by the Endeavor Agency." There was a moment of silence where the man waited for a response. He couldn't shake off the exhaustion. It was a weird feeling. Unlike his usual lack of energy, this was almost like he was sleepy, which was weird, as he was hardly sleepy when he actually needed rest, so why yawn now? He realized he'd missed the first half of a reply in his comm. "Eraserhead! Eraserhead, are you there?" Oh, that was Tsukauchi. He sounded worried. "Yeah, I'm okay. What were you saying?" The hero realized he was slurring his words. His eyes felt heavy, and it was all he could do to stay standing. There was a pause for a second before the detective spoke again. "What? Eraserhead, I can't understand." Eraserhead didn't hear the end of the other man's sentence before darkness overtook his vision, and his head hit the ground. The first thing Shota noticed when he woke up was that it was a little less dark, but the 2 men were still restrained on the ground next to him. The second thing he noticed was he felt small, not in an overwhelmed sense, but physically much smaller than before his impromptu nap. That was odd. He decided to check in with the detective and let the man know he was okay, so he stood and stretched with a yawn. That's when Shota realized something was very wrong. He looked around quickly before looking down at... He was looking at paws. 2 little black paws, This couldn't be happening. It just couldn't. He took a tentative step forward and watched as the paws moved. Well, that cleared it up. He was a cat now. There were honestly worse animals it could have been. It must have been that blonde one's quirk from when he'd slapped Shota. He looked around. The park was still empty besides the two criminals, so he decided to move around and help clear his mind. Walking as a cat was surprisingly easy, and he began pacing as he thought things through. How was he supposed to explain this? It's not like he could talk. Shota was looking around and saw his hero outfit and capture scarf on the floor, where he had woken up. Maybe he could just sit there and hope someone caught on. He had just decided on that as his best course of action when he heard a rustling from the woods close by. His ears twitched as he looked over and saw a small bird sat in the grass. Shota was not proud of what happened next, and when he was later asked why he hadn't waited by the criminals, he would just say something vague about seeing something suspicious. In reality, he had run after the bird. He hadn't planned to, and he would normally have much more self-control, but something in him had just made him. By the time he had lost the bird and realized there were hints of sun peeking through the trees, there was no chance of finding his way back. Fuck. He could only hope the criminals had been picked up, along with his hero costume. Shota looked around, trying to listen out for any sounds that would indicate where to go, and by some stroke of luck, he heard screaming. Yes, normally screaming wasn't a good thing, but he happened to recognize this screaming. It was Hisashi. He must have started his morning patrol, and, by any luck, Shota would find him. Shota set off at a brisk trot in the direction he had heard his husband, and decided to figure out how to get the man to recognize him later, after he found him. As Shota walked out into the now quiet, busy city, he gained a new respect for stray cats. Everything was far bigger, louder, and without his capture scarf a lot slower. People traveling to work or school clogged the streets, and it was all he could do to not get stepped on. Especially as he got closer to where he had heard Hisashi, or rather Present Mike. There seemed to be crowds watching. Finally, after weaving through far too many legs, Shota made it to the front of the crowd, just as the fight was ending, to see Present Mike cuffing a man that had to be at least 7 feet tall and pretty muscular. He probably had a strength enhancement quirk. It wasn't a huge fight by any means. The only heroes there were Mike and a new hero who had debuted 2 weeks ago, as well as the police, now taking the villain away. But still, Shota was glad to see his husband unscathed. The man, Cat, was just deciding whether to go over to the heroes or go back to his and Hisashi's apartment, or UA maybe, when he heard a loud squeal of, "Kitty!" before little arms were wrapping around him and pulling him up off the ground. It was very uncomfortable. He moved before thinking, claws scratching into chubby little hands and quickly being dropped. He saw the kid who had picked him up. She was maybe 6 and looked close to crying at the little red lines now on the backs of her hands. Shota felt a little bit bad, but not that much. He did not appreciate being grabbed, and he appreciated it even less when he turned and saw Mike had left. He was at the end of the street already. If Shota was right, the man would be going to UA now, and a plan was forming in his mind. Shota set off running to catch up with Mike. He was pleased to find he was actually quite fast and was trotting at the heels of the voice hero in about 2 minutes. He looked up at the blonde, who didn't seem to have noticed him. He was about to try getting Mike's attention by meowing, and wow, was that something he'd never expected to think, when the hero's phone started ringing and was pulled out of his pocket with a frown. Shota couldn't see his husband's phone, so he resigned himself to waiting as Mike spoke. "Yo, Present Mike speaking. Can I ask who this is?" There was a pause as Mike listened, his pace slowing until he was just standing still, frowning in worry. "Show... Eraserhead what?" Ah, this must be Tsukauchi calling. "What do you mean you can't find him?" Mike sounded anxious, and Shota couldn't help feeling guilty. Yeah, okay, just let me know if you find him. The call ended, and Shota watched as Mike quickly reconstructed his present Mike persona, looking happy as ever, apart from the slight sadness in his eyes. Shota was pulled from his thoughts as Mike began walking away. He had to find a way to get the man's attention. Shota ran after him. He tried shouting Hisashi's name and forgetting for a second he wouldn't be able to speak. The meow came out a little squeaky, but pretty loud. Not loud enough for Mike to turn around, though. Shota kept it up, following the voice hero as they approached UA, and keeping up a pretty much constant stream of meowing. It worked, eventually. Once they were away from the larger crowds and busy streets, the hero looked down, apparently only now hearing him, and smiled. "Aw, hi there, little guy." Shota couldn't help but feel annoyed. There was no way for Mike to know this random cat was his husband, but it was rather annoying to be baby-talked after everything that had happened. "You got a name?" "Shota, you idiot." He meowed. "You sound so grumpy." Shota hissed, not because Mike had really annoyed him, but this whole situation was infuriating. Also, he kinda wanted to try it out. "Wow, really grumpy. If I didn't know better, I'd say you're Show's spirit animal or something," the man said with a laugh as he stood to keep walking. He was so close to give up now. Shota ran after Mike and scratched his leg. It wasn't bad, not bleeding, but it definitely got the man's attention as he cried out. "Hey!" He turned to glare at the cat. "What was that for?" Shota meowed again, and again, and again, until he heard Mike say something that could sort this whole thing out. Are you trying to tell me something?" Finally, Shota thought, as he did his best impression of a nod in his weird new body. Mike's eyes widened. Are you someone's quirk? Do they need help?" Shota wondered how this conversation would work if he couldn't say yes or no. He decided on hissing. It seemed to convey the idea no pretty well. "Okay, so you're not a quirk." The man paused for a moment before continuing. "Are you a cat with a quirk? I've heard of animals occasionally having quirks." Shota hissed again. Mike thought for a moment, looking at the cat intently as he finally asked, "Are you a person, like you got turned into a cat by a quirk or something?" Shota, relieved to be getting somewhere, let out another squeaky meow, and Mike's eyes widened a little. Okay, so you're a person. Do I know you?" Again, Shota dipped his head in a nod, to which Mike paused for a moment, before half whispering, half shouting, "Shota?" Shota meowed, and Mike sat down on the side of the path to look closer at the cat, at its black fur and white markings around the neck. "Show? Wait, how did this even happen? Am I just going crazy talking to cats?" Shota just stared at his husband, and Mike stared back. "Okay, I should text Tsukauchi. Hang on." Mike pulled out his phone and quickly called the detective. "Mike, what's up?" the voice on the other end of the phone asked. "I found Eraserhead. He's a cat." Shota couldn't help but smile internally at his husband's bluntness. "You found—" "What do you mean he's a cat?" Tsukauchi hesitantly asked. "He got hit by some kind of quirk." "A cat?" Mike frowned. "A tail and fur, the whole 9 yards, yes. What should I do?" There was a pause. "Is he hurt?" Mike looked down at the cat. "No, I don't think so." "Okay, well, transformation quirks usually wear off, and there's nobody I can think of who could fix it, so he should be fine to hang around with you." Mike smiled. "Okay, thank you," Mike said happily. Mike looked down at Shota, and before the cat could do anything, he was being pulled from the ground and wrapped in leather-clad arms. "Come on then, Sho," Mike said happily, as he walked toward the school. Shota wiggled out of the man's arms and landed soundlessly on the ground to trot next to the voice hero. Mike laughed. "You're definitely Sho." After about 10 minutes of walking, the two arrived at the school and walked in, heading for the teacher's lounge. As they walked, Mike had time to think. How had Shota even ended up like this? Yes, he knew it was a quirk, but had it been an accident or an attack? And why had he run off instead of waiting for an officer? He just hoped the quirk wore off soon because, as cute as his partner was as a grumpy little cat, he could really do with getting some answers. He was so busy thinking about the situation, he didn't notice Namuri until he walked into the woman. "Oh, Hizashi, are you okay?" she asked quickly, and took a step back. She glanced down and saw the cat. Why do you have a cat?" Hizashi, who was now smiling widely, said in the most casual voice he could manage, "Oh, it's Sho." The moment of silence that followed was amazing. The cat stared at Namuri, blinked, and continued walking down the hall. Mike called after him quickly, "Sho, wait! Come back!" The cat did not listen. Namuri turned to Hizashi. Hizashi, are you feeling okay?" The man groaned, knowing this was probably his husband's stupid idea of a joke. "Nem, listen, I'm not crazy. That cat is Shota." She held the man's gaze for a few seconds, trying to gauge the situation before she gave a slow nod. Okay, I believe you," she said as she frowned and seemed to be thinking over the information. Hizashi didn't think she sounded very believing, but kept quiet. "So, care to explain why Shota was a cat now?" Namuri asked after a second. "Yeah, sure," the voice hero said and smiled in relief that Nem wouldn't have him sent to Recovery Girl. "Let's go to the staff room, though. I'm pretty sure that's where Sho is heading, and I don't want him getting in trouble somehow." Nem nodded, and the two set off. "So, I was just dealing with some criminal on my morning patrol, and when I'd finished, this cat comes running up and just follows me. Then I get a call from Tsukauchi explaining how Sho was missing, and they just found a pile of his clothes by some villains in the park." Namuri looked worried, but didn't interrupt. "So obviously I'm trying not to freak out, right? So anyway, I start walking to UA, and I honestly forget about the cat. I only noticed he was still there when I got to a quieter spot and heard him basically screaming at me." The two heroes reach the elevator and step in, as Hizashi keeps talking. "So I was getting weird vibes from this whole thing and started asking him questions. Long story short, I figured out it was Sho. He got hit by a quirk on patrol last night. I called Tsukauchi and he basically just told me to wait it out and Sho would be fine." By the end of the voice hero's rant, they were at the doors to the teacher's lounge. They could hear Vlad King's raised voice, as well as All Might and Snipe. Namuri looked at the man next to her. "This is going to be an interesting day," she said happily, before pushing the doors open. The first thing Hizashi saw was Vlad sitting on the floor with scratches on his arms and hands, looking extremely put out. The second was the mildly amused looks on most of the other teachers' faces. The third was a cat, the cat, sitting on Vlad King's desk and purring. Now Hizashi understood what his husband was doing, and there was no way he was going to ruin it. Most people would assume that Shota Aizawa was not one for practical jokes. They would be wrong. Shota had on multiple occasions used his "I'm too tired for this" attitude to get away with so many things, mostly involving Vlad King. Knowing all this and having a decent idea who it was all aimed at, he decided to play dumb as he walked in and stood by Namuri. "Not that I'm not a fan, but why is there a cat?" Hizashi asked, deciding to play dumb and see what would happen. There were a few hesitant responses before Vlad spoke up. "That cat just walked in here like 5 minutes ago, sat on my desk, and when I tried to move, it bit me." Hizashi did not smile. He didn't. The voice hero knew how much his husband disliked Vlad. He couldn't say he understood why, but he wouldn't lie and say it wasn't entertaining. Despite the attention at the beginning of the day, most of the teachers dispersed after that. Being pro-heroes meant sometimes dealing with weird situations, and since the cat didn't seem to pose a threat, they left it alone. Well, except Vlad, but the cat didn't exactly give him another option. As the rest of the teachers went off to deal with lesson planning or, in Power Loader's case, whatever new disaster Hatsume had caused, the cat stayed on Vlad's desk until the man eventually gave up and planned his classes for the day on the floor. By the time there were 10 minutes left until first period, a few people had noticed Aizawa still hadn't turned up. For a man that spent every free moment napping, he wasn't one to be late. He could hear 13 across the room sounding mildly concerned. "Hey, Namuri, is Eraserhead working today?" Hizashi knew Namuri and 13 were somewhat friends, and, considering how they acted in public, it wasn't surprising that people didn't think Aizawa liked him much. Still, he couldn't help covering for show. "I think he's sick today," the blonde called across the room to them. Namuri just smiled a little, but 13 looked almost scared. "Wait, what?" they asked a bit louder than necessary. "He came in wrapped up like a mummy after the USJ, but he's not here because he's sick? Mike, is he dying?" The absolute sincerity in their voice made it even funnier. And it was all the blonde could do to keep a straight face. "Yeah," he managed to get out. I think there was an accident during his patrol last night. He should be fine tomorrow." He clearly didn't sound convincing enough because 13 spent the rest of the time in the staff room anxiously asking Namuri if she knew anything. By the time lunch rolled around, Mike knew he shouldn't have said Shota was sick because there was already a rumor going around that the man had died. Having to explain to 1A that he was definitely alive when they confronted him at lunch was both hilarious and not. On one hand, the fact they all believed it was very funny. Trying to get Midoriya to stop sobbing was less fun. Now that he thought about it, he hadn't actually seen Shota much at all. He had, however, heard the intermittent swearing of 1B's homeroom teacher. Vlad was having a truly terrible day. It had started just fine, a regular day with nothing to suggest the confusion and annoyance he would have to deal with later on. It all started when he entered the staff room, with the goal of finishing his lesson plans and maybe getting a coffee, and was met with a very angry black and white cat. He had tried to move it off his desk and walked away with scratches all over his hand. He had tried again to get it to move when Present Mike and Midnight came in and was hissed at. He was sure he had seen Mike smiling when the man thought Vlad wasn't looking. Something was going on, he was sure. The idea was only furthered when the rest of the staff decided the cat wasn't an issue. Despite what he said, the cat was left alone. His only comfort being that there were only about 5 minutes left until the first lesson, and he could just spend the day in his classroom. This plan, too, was ruined when the cat got up at the bell, stretched, and followed Vlad. The man tried assuring himself it was a coincidence, tried walking faster and getting lost in the crowds. After all, nobody else seemed to think the cat even being here was odd, let alone its behavior. The cat reminded him of Aizawa. Quiet, annoying, and petty. The cat was Aizawa. That was what he decided when it jumped up on his desk in the classroom and began absently tapping things off the table as students began filing in. Yes, cats do that, but after 3 pens, a book, his mug, and a stack of papers were on the floor, he couldn't write it off as just cat behavior. It was far too personal. Regular cats don't follow one specific person around to annoy the living shit out of them all day. And it really was all day. During homeroom, it kept knocking things off its desk, much to the confusion and entertainment of 1B. After that, he tried locking the cat in the room before heading out to fill in for a history class that he was almost certain was Aizawa's. Locking the cat away actually worked. For 7 whole minutes. He had just opened the computer to take attendance when the cat just walked in. He still has absolutely no idea how it managed it. It was unnerving. What was worse, though, was how the animal hissed whenever he spoke, and only at him. He had just about got through the attendance for class and told them that this was a study period before the hissing was about to drive him insane, and he ended up saying nothing else for the whole lesson. After his class ended, he grabbed the cat by the scruff of its neck, only narrowly avoiding the swipe from its claws, and marched out and down the hall. Vlad kicked the door to the staff room open to see Midnight, Mike, and Nezu, all of who looked over at the loud entrance to see Vlad King, covered in scratches, holding a very angry cat. The hero dropped the animal, which quickly ran over and sat on his desk. "Do not let that thing out," he yelled before leaving, slamming the door behind him. Nezu looked the cat over quickly, before asking in a perfectly pleasant tone, "Aizawa-kun, have you been tormenting Sekijiro-kun all day?" The cat meowed. Just then, Hizashi spoke up. "He got hit by a quirk on patrol last night." Nezu nodded. "I am aware, yes." There was a short pause before Midnight asked, "And you don't mind Aizawa being a menace?" Nezu smiled. "Aizawa-kun is one of my most hard-working teachers. I do not think one day off from that will be detriment to anybody." "Anybody but Vlad," Hizashi said under his breath. Nezu heard him, of course, but chose to pretend otherwise. After being pretty much locked in the staff room, Aizawa didn't have much left to do but curl up and nap, which really wasn't much different to what he would have done before. He woke to the feeling of movement. There was a light breeze in his fur and the sound of cars. He looked up to see his husband carrying him. He squirmed to be put down, and thankfully, Hizashi understood. "You better tell me what you did to Vlad once you're back to normal. You know that, right?" Hizashi asked, as they walked to the voice hero's car. Aizawa gave a small meow in agreement, and Hizashi laughed. "You know, this was probably the most fitting quirk to have hit you. You're basically a cat anyway." He opened the passenger side door to allow the cat to jump in, before going around and getting in the driver's seat. The radio played as they made the short trip home, Hizashi rambling on about his day. Once they were back, his husband disappeared off to get out of his hero outfit, and Aizawa made himself comfortable on the sofa. Hizashi walked back in an hour later with his hair down and freshly blow-dried. He sat down, and if Aizawa moved to lay on his chest, that was his business. Hizashi put on a movie, but between early morning and late-night patrols, as well as how comfortable the sofa was, both were asleep within half an hour. At about 1, Hizashi woke. He was confused and groggy, so he just reached for his husband's hand, squeezed it, and fell back asleep. All right, listeners, this concludes the one-shot entitled Even Heroes Need a Catnap. Personally, I'm a huge fan of this one-shot. I think the author did an amazing job. I think it's such a great way that they painted the dynamics here. The focus is more on the teachers, on Aizawa and Hizashi, rather than on the students, which you see in a lot of these types of fics. So it's really nice to see a little bit of a switch up. And I love the dynamics with Aizawa and Vlad. Found myself laughing a lot throughout the fic at those moments, and I'm sure many of you did as well. But please drop your comments to let me know your reactions to everything. As a reminder, this fic, along with pretty much all of them on this channel, is located over on AO3, and the author has definitely not seen enough support over there yet for this fanfic. So if you have the chance, if you could slide over leaving comments, kudos, and support to the original author as well, I'm sure it would be much appreciated. And as always, thank you all so much for listening.